All right, so today we're diving deep into ancient Rome,
Yeah,
but not just battles and gladiators, though. We'll probably touch on those too.
right.
We're tackling a leader who was as much a philosopher as an emperor Marcus Aurelius.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
You
This is a
know.
guy commanding armies, fighting off plagues, putting down rebellions.
Yeah, and in the middle of it all,
Yeah.
he's scribbling down these deeply personal reflections in his meditations.
Like literally in battlefield tent sieges, you see these notes scattered throughout among the quades, this at Carmuntum. It's wild.
It's like peeking into the mind of an emperor under pressure.
Talk about mindfulness.
Right. Talk about mental discipline. And it really highlights the practical side of Stoicism for him. It wasn't just theory, it was his life.
Okay, so before we get too deep into Stoicism itself, paint a picture for our listeners. Who was Marcus Aurelius? What was his deal?
All right, so we're talking Roman Emperor 161 to 180 AD, a really turbulent time for the empire.
Right, smack in the thick of it.
Exactly. Constant warfare, the Antonine Plague, internal strife, you name it.
Yeah.
Yet Aurelius is remembered not for brutality, but for wisdom, justice, a deep sense of duty.
Which makes you wonder, how did this philosophy, Stoicism, shape his leadership? It seems almost counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Here's this emperor at the pinnacle of power choosing to live by this really strict philosophy. I mean, I used to think Stoicism was about being like a robot, suppressing all emotions.
Yeah, I get that. There's this misconception that Stoicism equals emotionless, but it's more about mastering your emotions through reason.
Okay, so less about denying your emotions and more about navigating them.
Exactly. It's about virtue as the highest good, about living in harmony with nature, both human and universal.
So how did he actually live that out? I mean, be one, that's a pretty high bar.
Well, let's take the Antonine Plague, for example. This was a devastating epidemic. Imagine the pressure he was under, the fear, uncertainty. Yet he leads with reason, implements quarantines, public health measures, all while acknowledging the very real suffering around him.
It's like he's a masterclass in crisis management.
Right.
He doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, but he also doesn't let it completely derail him.
And that's Stoicism in action. Focus on what you can control.
It's like finding that calm in the middle of chaos. That's something I think we could all use a little bit of these days, but it wasn't just about staying calm, right? Stoicism goes deeper than that.
Absolutely. It's about accepting what we can't control, which for Aurelius, even as emperor, was a lot. But here's the key. Stoicism also stresses focusing on what is within our control, our thoughts and actions, and that's where his leadership gets really interesting.
So it's like accepting the hand you're dealt, but then playing your cards the best you can.
Exactly. He couldn't control the barbarian invasions, but he could control how we responded. He chose to lead with justice reason, even when facing opposition. He writes in Meditations, "The best revenge is not to imitate the injury."
Wow. Now that's a tough one to live by, especially when you're a Roman emperor. It really makes you think, if more leaders thought like that, maybe history would look a lot different. But I digress. One thing I'm really curious about is how Aurelius applied this idea of living in accordance with nature to being emperor. Seems kind of contradictory, right? Like, shouldn't a ruler be shaping the world, not just accepting it as it is?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to misinterpret accepting fate as being passive, especially if you're in a position of power. But for Aurelius, aligning with nature wasn't passive at all. He saw his role as emperor as serving a natural order, upholding justice, acting for the good of the empire as a whole.
Okay, so it's not about just letting things happen. It's more about understanding the flow of things and working within that framework.
Exactly. Imagine you're trying to swim upstream against a strong current. Exhausting, right? But if you understand the current, you can navigate it, use it to your advantage. Aurelius believed that true power came from understanding and working within natural laws, both human and universal.
It's a very different way of thinking about leadership, for sure. It makes you wonder, though, if Aurelius was so focused on virtue and justice. How do we reconcile that with the persecution of Christians during his reign? It's something I've always found a little bit confusing.
It's a valid question and a reminder that historical figures, even the most admired ones, are complex. We can't look at the past only through the lens of our values today.
So how do we make sense of Aurelius's actions in this context?
Well, during Aurelius's time, the Roman Empire saw Christianity as a threat, a challenge to its authority. Christians refused to acknowledge the emperor as divine, which was a big no-no in terms of the social and political order.
So maybe it was more of a clash of ideologies than a purely religious persecution.
Exactly. While we might disagree with his actions today, it's essential to understand the historical context. Aurelius was a product of his time, and his decisions, Even the ones we might question today were made within that specific context.
It's a good reminder that even the most well-intentioned people can make decisions that seem
Yeah.
out of line with their values when we look back.
Definitely. It's that whole thing about judging the past by today's standards. It's complicated.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Aurelius, what's the biggest thing that sticks with you? What's the most valuable part of Stoicism for people today?
For me, it's that emphasis on having a personal philosophy. Aurelius, with his writings, his life, he shows us how important it is to have a framework for dealing with life's ups and downs.
Yeah, like having that internal compass.
Exactly. Something to guide you when things get rough.
And it's not even necessarily about being a full-on Stoic, right?
Right. It's about finding those principles that resonate with you, that give you strength direction. Whether it's Aurelius's focus on virtue, his commitment to justice, or even just his ability to find peace in the middle of chaos, there's something here for everyone.
It's about figuring out how to live a good life, whatever that means for you.
Exactly. And that's a journey.
Uh-huh.
Takes self-reflection, questioning your assumptions, and trying to align your actions with your values, just like Aurelius did.
I think that's why his meditations still speak to people after all these centuries. It's like he's having a conversation with us across time, urging us to examine our own lives and strive for something more.
That's a great way to put it. And it is a conversation worth having. So to our listeners, if this deep dive has piqued your interest, don't stop here. Pick up Aurelius's Meditations. Check out other Stoic writers. See what grabs you. You might be surprised how relevant this ancient wisdom still is.
It's like that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We're all still trying to figure out these big questions about life, death, and everything in between. Maybe a little stoicism is what we need to navigate these crazy times.
Right? Maybe we all need to channel our inner emperor.
Love it. So on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the words of Marcus Aurelius and the power of stoicism. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
See you next time.